I am Melanie Goisauf. I am Research Officer at the European Biobanking Infrastructure BBMRI ERIC in the ELSI team, so the Ethical, Legal, Societal Issues team. And my background is in social science, in particular in sociology and science and technology studies. And yeah, I think I tried to start. My presentation.
Yeah, we see it.
All right, yeah. Perfect. All right, so my talk today will be about biobank consent models. As I was also asked to say something about participant engagement, I will do that at the very end, but I think my whole presentation is meant to go in that direction, and I hope it will become clear why also participant engagement is becoming more and more important when it comes to biobanking and in obtaining consent. I'm very sorry, I had a meeting before, so I couldn't watch all the presentations from today, but I guess you heard a lot about this. These are samples, tissues, biomaterials collected for research, for biobanking, stored in freezers or in other kinds of storages. And what's in there, I think it's also clear to this audience. It's donations of patients or research participants. And we can perceive these samples as being donations in terms of that are not ready to be sold in whole or in parts, and that changes a little bit about what the status of these this type of materials are. So is it just kind of a waste or leftover, or does it really constitute another kind of property? And to that, all the questions around who are the participants, what is done with this kind of tissues or donations, what does it mean for further research, are really going beyond this kind of collections. So that brings you more to the tissue issue I wanted to start with, which is basically the status of the donated issue. So are we talking about waste? Is DNA somehow representing a person? Is it a thing? Is it, so what is it? What is really the difference between donations to a biobank and a blood donation? And all these questions are really connected also to the biobank issue itself. So what is the ethical status of this? Is it a gift? Is it a commodity? It's not, it cannot be sold. But it's somehow, it is within the business models of other companies. So all these considerations about these donations, and I'm mostly talk about the samples itself right now, are really impacting the practice and policy making around these donations. And why are these considerations are so important? Are best explained with one of the most important cases when it comes to the ethics discourse about using biomaterials or samples from humans for research. What you can see on the slide here are the HeLa cell lines. So cells that have been taken by an biopsy and in the early 50s, and has been used for many types of research, which were then be possible because of these cells. Because these cells, which are cancerous cells, turned out to have a really extraordinary capacity to survive and reproduce. And this opens up a lot of possibilities to do research with them. And as you can see, just a few examples what was made possible with it. So it were all the breakthroughs, including research on polio, the polio vaccine, so also genetic medicine, also including IVF and cloning, all the applications in industry, gene mapping, what made possible with that, and HIV and so on and so forth. We can also follow this line as one of the most recent applications for research has been that these cell lines are also used for vaccines against COVID-19. But when we go back then to the original source of these cells, we see the story of Henrietta Lacks. And this marks one of the most important cases, as you can imagine, as all the applications are based on these cell lines. The ethical, legal, societal questions as well are attached to these developments. Why is that? The cell lines have been shared widely among researchers and scientists, but this has been done without the consent of Henrietta Lacks. And now I want to continue with this case also with the question how informed consent, so kind of a little bit the history of informed consent. Why is that? Why is it possible or necessary, even that? So informed consent was introduced to protect individual patients in medical practice, in clinical studies from harm and exploitation. And it has also been introduced as a way to mitigate risk that might occur in a medical study and to safeguard patients and participants' rights. The case of Henrietta Lacks, respectively her immortalized cell lines that has been retrieved from the biopsy, as I said, turned out as one of the most important cell lines. And these cells have been taken without a consent later, nor were she or her family compensated for the extraction or use. And yeah, and this case also continues until now. So even if the law doesn't require that informed consent was taken back then, the legal questions itself are also still important, as the types of research are really changing. And so this was one of the cases which shows how the importance of informed consent, and that there was a time where informed consent was not the norm in biomedical research, and why this is also important. Another important case back in history was the Nuremberg Code, which stated that the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential for taking medical research, and it should be ensuring free power of choice based on sufficient knowledge about the risk and objectives. And I will come back to these aspects a little bit later, because now it's getting a little bit challenging. What are, how can choices be made? What kind of knowledge or information is needed or is even possible to get within the biobanking field? And what kind of risks are we talking about today? But first, I want to also highlight a webinar which we will organize at BBMRI ERIC, which will happen in November 25th. And then we go back to a very important case, also along the lines of the HeLa cell lines, as in 2013, researchers published the DNA sequence of the genome of the HeLa cells. And the genetic information was made available publicly. And this constitutes another important case here around the controversy which leads us to reconsider our understanding of the genomic data and the relevant data practices, and the sharing of these materials and information across countries, across research groups. And within this webinar, we will follow up on this case and the implications it has for biobanking or sharing of data, especially genomic data. Of course, these the initial cases are, there is, some time ago. I also want to mention some more recent cases just to illustrate why these questions are still so important to ask, and why the informed consent is not such an easy thing when it comes to biomedical research or biobanking. First, the case around the Havasupai tribe in Grand Canyon. And the members of the tribe have donated blood samples for research, as the tribe has a high rate of type 2 diabetes. But also these samples, or research with these samples, was also made beyond this initial type 2 diabetes study. And it was also used in research related to ethnic migration, metabolic disorders, alcoholism, and schizophrenia. The latter is really a stigmatizing condition within the tribe. And participants claimed that they were not aware that this kind of research is also allowed within the broad consent they gave beyond this type 2 diabetes research. So this really pretty much brings us to the question of the definition and use of informed consent within with vulnerable groups, and also to the question what is involved in a specific model or form of informed consent. The other case I want to refer to is a little bit different in the way information is not only used, but also kind of framed or redefined. There was a genome-wide association studies on the genetic architecture of same-sex sexual behavior, shortly referred to as the sexual orientation studies, and samples were used from UK Biobank, and these samples were obtained based on the broad consent of the participants who consented to health research or health-related research proposals. And also this, the study itself about sexual orientation or same-sex sexual behavior was reviewed and approved by the UK Biobank Access Subcommittee. But the issue around this case is the question whether sexuality, or in particular homosexuality, is included in understandings of health-related research. And the background is also because of homosexuality has long been removed from the disease classifications, and making such a claim that is health-related is of course normatively problematic, and implying that this could have also been connected to a disease again. So what the difference between these cases is, on the one hand, there was it was not sure, especially among the participants, if so for what kind of types of research the data could be used, and in the other case, it was the definition what is health related was made later, after participants gave consent to the research. And this brings me to say something about why ELSI, so the ethical, legal, and societal issues perspective, is necessary here. And ELSI itself, of course, is a combination of many things. So first, it's about the legal requirements related to privacy and data protection, the ethical challenging regarding consent models, which I mentioned a couple already, and also to protect the participants' autonomy. also around all the questions which are important, especially in data sharing or international data sharing, and also around the secondary use of samples and data and return of results. And of course, more from the societal perspective, the question, how can participants be involved or the public be engaged? Also reconsidering patients as active participants. So not in the case anymore of the case of Henrietta Lacks, where the samples were taken without consent and the sample itself had a different kind of status. But now from the ELSI perspective, participants are seen as more actively involved, and that they should also be involved in the governance of biobanks, as this kind of involvement is also very important for biobank sustainability. So as you can see here is that all these questions, all these really important questions, are now somehow packed into this informed consent procedure or informed consent sheets, which have become kind of a passage point, with all the wide-ranging debates on which type of consent is acceptable, which should be in place, what should be covered, should consent be there at all, and all these really important questions are now located at this informed consent. But as I also want to mention some ELSI questions that goes beyond this particular point in time of giving consent are again cases which happened or which became important after consent was given, and where all these kind of newer questions surrounded about data sharing and the potential, especially genomic research has nowadays, became important. So one is the question about public health benefits over individual privacy rights. That goes back to a case from Iceland, from Decode Iceland in specifically, where they found out about cancer risks, and the question was, should people be warned about the danger, about the risks, as the approval or the consent said it's anonymized, and they will not hear anything about it, about any kind of findings. And so should these people be warned if researchers do have this kind of knowledge? And at the same time, in Europe, we have the right to not know of this kind of knowledge. And this opened up also the discussions around what is ethically acceptable in this point, to not inform about risks, or should we inform about risks in more in the perspective of public health? And another question is about kind of also business models, so public good versus commercial interests. And there has been a case that a UK firm bought a Sardinian DNA sample, so a biobank which went bankrupt. And so in order to use these samples, not really, because samples cannot be sold, but the data around it, and which are stored on the kind of servers and infrastructures of this biobank. And the question there is, I mean, the participants or the donors didn't consent for profit uses. So this also became a lawsuit about, is this ethically acceptable? What does change? And this opens up a wide variety of ELSI questions or challenges. So I guess also currently discuss if the use of data and samples is possible without informed consent at all, as data are anonymized, which also turned out it can be problematic in the age of genetics and big data research. What happens if regulations change in biobanks? Biobanks are collecting samples for research, for future research. So in between the donation and the use, there could be changes in the regulation. How can data be protected in the future in these changing environments? How should withdrawal of consent work? Is it also what is about power relations and social justice? So around the case of Henrietta Lacks, what I forgot to mention is Henrietta Lacks was a Black woman. And this also raises currently questions about racial injustices. The case I mentioned before about Iceland was also, should participants informed in case of incidental findings? And of course, also all the questions around how to better engage participants and what does it mean for informed consent models in the future. So informed consent in biobanking, what is it? So it's a concept model that has been extended from clinical practice to biomedical research. So that means the original informed consent was designed for a different kind of research, which was more study specific and where you kind of have an idea about the risks for participants and also the information. So why we are talking about informed consent is to give participants all the relevant information about the research before they make the decisions, and also to make a choice about their participation without any influence. And this informed consent has become a key solution for managing everything around consent and participation in biobanking, but within the bioethics community, there is ongoing debate whether which consent types is applicable and ethically acceptable. And as this kind of consent has been adopted from the traditional consent models, it of course raises the question if it complies with ethical and legal standards, and which kind of information should be given or even could be given for this type of research where samples are collected before the study itself started. And so you do not precisely know what will turn out. So on the other hand, to enable this kind of research and make it possible, because we also saw what could be possible with research with biomaterials and genetic information. For biobanking, the broad consent model has become the practical solution to manage all these requirements. So what does it mean? Broad consent in biobanking means that consent for the collection and use of samples and data within a biobank is taken at the time of enrollment, so the signing up to the donated materials, also based on the ethical approval or the approval of our ethics committees. And broad consent also includes that samples stored in a biobank can be used for new studies that fall within the scope of the original consent. So for instance, or for example, biomedical research, without going back to the participants or patients and ask for reconsent again. This type of consent was justified with the minimal risk for participants. So the risk itself for a biobank participants in terms of physical risks are really limited, but the benefits for the public good are seen as much more bigger than the risk for the individual. And it also kind of make this type of research also kind of manageable, because you don't need to go back to the participant and ask for and obtain a consent again and again. But among ELSI researchers, there is, of course, since longer an ongoing debate whether it is still appropriate for biobanking, as data could be used, linked, shared more easily between researchers. And also because this type of consent has been taken perhaps years before the data is used for other kinds of projects. So talking about consent models, so where is broad consent? We have on the one hand the scientific consent to single studies, so kind of the original consent, where you know the purpose of the study and also the risk. And on the other end, blanket consent, which means this is the unrestricted consent to any kind of use, including forensic and commercial uses. And as you can see here, there is also not one broad consent. So broad consent could be include different things, also follow-ups to the original studies or cancer research, or it includes everything from which is approved by a research ethics board. Connected to that is of course also critique around the broad consent model in biobanking. Most importantly, I think that the wrong impression or implication that the ethical works or the ethics work is done when consent is obtained. So when participants have signed the consent sheet, yeah, ethics is kind of completed. And this has also been discussed in connection that there needs to be a strong and continuous ethical review process. So not about the specific studies and the consent sheet itself, but also about the uses, which are not known at the time consent is obtained. A discussion is also around, as participants are asked to consent, that their data and samples are be deposited for future research projects. So can we even speak of kind of properly informed? Is it really informed decision making at all? So can we speak of really an informed consent that could be given? And when you actually don't know what is done with your samples or what could future research be able to do with it. So the idea of giving enough information to allow participants to give an informed, to make an informed decision is challenged by the question, even if, I mean, if you don't know what you are consenting to in the future, is it then even possible to withdraw consent? Can participants even imagine what might be done in future studies? I think we as professionals in the fields, we even by ourselves cannot say what the future can bring, as the research aims and also the methods involved, and what are kind of future risks. And this is the challenge here, of course, is as you don't know about the future, how can you foresee risks which would then constitute kind of a proper information for the type of informed consent we want to have, or we are still talking about currently. So what is important to mention here is that the risk profile has changed. So all the risks of informational harm from leaks or hacks on the one hand, but on the other hand, what has become really an important question is the risk of re-identifiability and stigmatization, the latter especially in the context of the tribe I mentioned before, or around all the racial injustices, particularly in connection to genomic analysis in a really datafied world, so genomic research within big data research. So this kind of changes a little bit, to a much degree, the risk profile from physical risks, which are really limited, to kind of an informational risks. And as I also mentioned in the case before, the understanding of what qualified as health-related research could change over time, as health and disease and all this are all definitions. But we are asking participants to give consent as a specific point in time based on their understanding what health research means at the time at which they give consent. And of course, there is this situatedness of consent itself. So it's around societal values, definitions of health and disease, privacy, and on the one side, and on the other, the idea that we, of course, aim for large-scale research, so long and secondary uses of data, and also global data sharing. So also the way research is done has changed in terms of international collaborations, and also it's much about data and sharing data, especially genomics data. And the type of consent is really situated within the time and also the place in which consent is given. From my experience, I've did a couple of public engagement exercises in Austria over the last couple of years. And you really can observe how public discourses and so on also influence the way consent and risks are shaped. I just want to highlight a recent paper I was involved in about questioning, especially the second part I mentioned, that the understandings and the definitions and categories we are using are really subject to change. And a definition in this paper, we are referring to the sexual orientation study I mentioned before, also the case for what kind of study the data are used, and what kind of categories I used to do the research, research on this kind of data. And so what has been the way of managing managing this all these circumstances and risks around data? So the tool that has become the important one, or the standard tool for protecting donor data, is anonymizations, which means removing data of personally identifying information from the sample or from the data set itself. And but it has been proven that it's possible to link supposedly anonymous data to specific individuals by comparing information across multiple databases. So in the age of big data, this is possible, and also raises then the question or the problem that just because the absence of names, to simplify it a little bit, does not mean that it's also the identifiability is absent. So the fundamental issue is that the risk of identification increases as our personal information is widely shared across multiple databases. And even when this kind of information remains relatively private, so it's just shared only in healthcare databases, it often carries unique identifiers. So the main problem or the main change in the risk profile is now re-identifiability or re-identification. And kind of this proof of why this became so important was also within this shift from the tissue issue, so to say, to the data issues. So is broad consent the right consent or the appropriate consent model still, when data could be used, linked, shared more easily, which is of course the benefit in research. Please don't understand me wrong. I see of course there are a huge potential in sharing the data, and if the data is already collected, then it should be used for research. This is also in agreement with the participants. But the way consent is obtained for yet unknown research purposes is problematic. And also if when we share data within a global research community, so who is responsible, which legal frameworks are the important one here. So we also expecting participants to, while they are making the decisions based on the situated knowledge about what health research is and what data use is and the risks are, we at the same time expect them to act kind of a global citizens to support global research. So all the issues about data identifiability and discussions about anonymity, and is anonymity possible or doable anymore, still a valid concept, causes a bunch of other questions. So also it's not about the individual making consent about their own risks anymore. It also could affect close relatives or family members as well when we talk about genomics research. And so it is question, is anonymization is still the right thing or the appropriate thing? And if it should be still understood as a method for protecting privacy. And one case became really important also here was among this. So Janif Ehrlich showed that it's possible to link supposedly anonymous data to specific individuals by comparing information across multiple databases, and he showed that it's possible to even discover the identities of people who participate in genetic research studies by cross-referencing their data with publicly available information, so information that could be accessed in the internet. So talking about informed consent as a passage point for all these questions and where all these questions should be managed, it becomes then problematic when we end up kind of here. So consent sheets, which should manage it all, do it all, include all these potential possible risks that could arise with this kind of data collection and use and biobanking and so on and so forth. So so the risk within consent could be that it became such too big, and that this too much information would have been necessary to be included in this consent procedure. And in the literature, this also mentioned this could also lead to a kind of transparency paradox. So in order to be transparent and to inform participants, to put all the information in or describe it in a language that is understandable. So also it should be easy to understand, but detailed enough so that research participants could be able to make a decision still about something that is unknown for the future. So that's it could also mean that by increasing transparency and giving more information, it could also kind of backfire, that is getting too much and still not that what participants need. So there are other types of consent currently discussed. So one way is dynamic consent, and dynamic consent itself is not a distinct or specific consent model. It is a tool based on a digital database. The idea is that it's personalized digital communication based on a platform, password protected, that allows participants to manage their consent preferences continuously. So there's not this one point in time giving paper-based consent, but manage all my preferences or even withdraw from the biobank on an online platform, and also to follow up on the activities as the circumstances around the biobank itself could change, as I mentioned previously with the case of around the Sardinian biobank, or if you do not agree anymore in which types of research the biobank is collaborating with. So basically the idea around dynamic consent is that it really connects the researcher and the research participant more on this online platform. So even the recruitment, the informed consent, and the follow-up is located there, and it's now just giving one-time informed consent, but it's more about consent management. And this has, of course, benefits as it connects researchers and participants more, increases also the engagement of participants, makes also for researchers recontact easier, could improve transparency, and also, could be helpful in order to the use or reuse of samples and data with the knowledge of the participant. Of course, there are also risks or kind of disadvantages connected to it. That one risk could be that it fails to protect the autonomy of research participants sufficiently, because you cannot ensure if they really understood the information which is provided on this website, or if consent is also given in kind of uncontrolled conditions. So is consent obtained without influence? So this goes back to the very beginning of my presentation about it should be given free and based on autonomy and without individual influences or pressure. And of course, as it is a web-based platform, it also opened the question of or the challenge of a digital divide. So specific communities or specific vulnerable groups or elderly people are perhaps not able to participate in this kind of consent tool. Because, as I said, it's not about which kind of research could be done and all the information, it also goes really in that kind of direction, what happens with incidental findings or return of results. And there is currently discussions going on whether feedback on individual genetic research results from genome sequencing to research participants should be given, as it could really have consequences for health decision-making, influence also relatives, family members, and also still the question if people want to be informed about this kind of knowledge. Connected to the idea, not only for dynamic consent, but for the consent and the role of participants in biobanking itself. Also a few words about public and participant engagement. And as biobanks are really dependent on the readiness and of potential participants to donate their biomaterials and samples to a biobank, biobanks are really also dependent on the support of publics, not only because they are often run based on public money, but also on public support. And the understanding of citizens, participants in biobanking research has changed. So they are not referred to as donors anymore, but either as participants or even stakeholders, as they are also gatekeepers for the further developments of biobanks. So engaging with patients and participants has become an important subject in all that. And during these engagement activities, which are kind of also reshaped in doing that from just informing participants to better involving them in the decision making. Within these such events, you can really observe, and I'm also mention an example from my own research here, that the assessment of consent forms are shaped also by understandings what is appropriate research. And here everything comes together, which I have mentioned before. So especially in regards to the genomic data collection and use and the future use of this kind of information and samples. And also what also constitutes understanding of appropriateness of this research is also the lack of knowledge about practices and risks. So a more dynamic tool to obtain consent could be helpful, really helpful here. So what you can observe in this kind of exercises is compared to different methodologies about opinions from consent from the perspective of participants, is that also that the broad consent is seen as a useful model, because it's seen also as a compromise to manage all these different kind of things. On the one hand, to of course support research, but on the other hand, to be informed and to will to have a say in all that. And this is also kind of reflected by the biobankers, so by the biobank professionals. We did a survey among them, and which shows on the first hand that participant engagement is not yet, unfortunately, not the norm, which is because of mostly institutional or structural conditions. So lack of time and money was an issue here. But basically it is supported to inform participants either in these engagement activities or in the consent procedure. And here you can see there is a high number of participants in the survey who agreed or said it should be provided in the informed consent procedures. Information like what's the purpose of the associated research. So even if it's about in the fields or types of research, also if there should be the possibility of returning individual research, and of course if data and samples should be shared either with industry or with collaborators in other countries in and outside the EU. So there is a high number of biobanking professionals who support this kind of better informed participants in informed consent procedures, to put it more widely, as I mentioned, the problem with putting everything in the sheets. It's difficult to give you a clear example of what a consent sheet or a good practice consent process should look like. As I meant, I hope I could make clear that it's really based on where consent is obtained, in terms of also where you're located, in which kind of legal framework, what type of information could be used. I want to just highlight two examples here in connection to COVID-19 research. So our partners at BBMRI Italy have set up this website, and there you can read, for example, their informed consent sheets for the collection of materials for COVID-19 research, also in connection to their legal frameworks. And you can easily follow up this discussion or the introduction in the recording of a webinar we had within BBMRI ELSI, which is available on YouTube, where this kind of so all the challenges Italy had with COVID-19 and the naval research around it. And they also introduced within this webinar their idea about how to manage consent here. And another example is from Germany. So their consent is based also on a system which gives you a clear idea of which is consent obtained, still pending, not given anymore. Is there also agreement to everything, or is it quite differently? You can also see their template for consent on their website. And also that's the second example which was discussed in this webinar. So I would highly recommend to to follow up on this, as of course, as Germany and Italy are also very different in terms of their legal frameworks around biobanking. And you can also find some more information on the BBMR ELSI knowledge base, so basically all the legal documents and regulations around it, and also some templates. All right. Yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to try to answer them. But basically, you can see there are even more questions around informed consent that I'm able to answer. But if you have more information about informed consent, but also more questions, then I think I reached my goal, because it's not, there will be no perfect solutions. It's a process as things are changing very quickly. And yeah, I think we need to discuss further what could be appropriate consent models for now and for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Melanie. I do have some questions, but maybe someone from the participants want to go first. Okay, everyone is still thinking. Actually, I would like to hear your opinion about this emergency situation laws and COVID-19 research. Is it, do you think there will be a lot of issues because everything, well, not everything, but a lot of things were done in a hurry? And also these emergency situation laws gives more control to government and less control to public. Do you see some problems that could rise?
That's a huge question. I think, yeah, of course, the emergency situation right now has, on the one hand, showed what is still needed in terms of consent, and it, of course, also made some things possible, because samples and data was needed very quickly. So what you can see in the case of Italy and Germany, for examples, in the webinar, you can see how they managed to do this kind of research. So either it was covered by the consent already there somehow in the case of Germany, but in Italy they needed to invent something here. So I think it's still too early what will be the long-term effects of this emergency situation. I think what's kind of where we can take it for sure that it will have effect. So it will change the way we're thinking perhaps of using these materials, and also what I mentioned before in balancing the public health issues or the public interest with also individual protection of participants. So we will see how this will turn out. Currently, there are all these measures taken to enable research right now, but I think we will see how this will really impact also legal frameworks, decision making, and so on in the future. I know this does not clearly answer your question, but
yeah, it's actually what I expected, because I think like I can see that there are some challenges like doing this properly and doing it fast enough to meet the needs actually that we are presented with.
yeah.
And another question about the information is sensitive, and for example the example you mentioned about the sexuality, but what about maybe you know some examples to some health insurance companies are interested to use some, I don't know, genetic information to apply for their price policies or something? Is it also an issue?
Well, it could be. To my knowledge, or I'm not aware of a really particular case, or that it's even, I mean, of course, they could not obtain all this information directly from health research settings or hospitals. But as I mentioned, I think it will become an issue we need to think about, or think about especially about safeguards, because if you want to find something out, as I mentioned before, you do not necessarily go back to the original source, as data is collected more broadly, more in various kind of databases, and what kind of knowledge could be made possible, to say it like that, by linking data. And we had I think 2 weeks ago in Austria, this case that it turns out that a bank included in their contracts kind of this paragraph about that you allow that your data or your profile from social media could be used somehow, and by doing that you are agreeing that this kind of data could be accessed or could be known to the bank branch, which includes, of course, if you're, of course, your gender, your age, if you're a member of a trade union, and of course the genomic data, because this is shared in databases right now by people for different kind of reasons. And this does not mean, of course, it's a legal thing, just to be sure that they cannot be charged, because they accidentally could get access to this kind of data. But what else could it open up? What does it mean if kind of a bank branch or insurance or whatever include such information in their profiles or risk profiles or donor profiles? So the case I mentioned about the sexual orientation studies, of course, it's not, it hasn't been done in order to identify people or stigmatizing people, just to make associations in between behavior and genetics, but this could be easily be misunderstood as a causality. And it's not just, I mean, and what is made with it, with this information, I think within the research context is one thing, but what we also mentioned in this paper was the development of an app, of an application for your smartphone, where you can use kind of your genetic information and see some information, I don't know, about your sexual orientation, whatever. I mean, it's not there anymore, but okay, it really depends, and this goes back to the really situatedness of what you think, how you think about this. I mean, we say, okay, it's an app, what else? I don't care about it. But when you know that this app was invented by a person who is located in a country where homosexuality is kind of crime, then it really changes all these things. And this also happens with the research on political behavior and education. So it could be implications, and this data is really more used more broadly and collected more broadly. So also in terms of insurances, there are different kinds of safeguards or stronger safeguards needed, so that the profiles of different countries, companies, is not based on some assumed advantages or disadvantages or whatever based on genetics.
Okay, and the last thing I want to touch from my side is about you know, like there's this ongoing like very active discussion about what social media and how we share actually data that we are not aware that we are sharing, and what is done with it, and so on. And so what is your point of view about this, these companies providing commercial genetics tests for ancestry and this kind of thing, and then they use somehow this information, like Google has some startup who is doing this genetics testing and so on. What do you think about this?
I mean, that's a huge topic. Yeah, I see, and it's I think it's really different also in European country how these these things are used. So this also had a kind of development or process. So as 23andMe kind of started, or it was just, nice to learn about ancestry and so on and so forth. And if you're more, I don't know, cat or a dog person, I don't know. And so this was collected really broadly, and I think with a different, this goes really, of course, based on the consent of the people who send in their samples, but this, I think this also goes back to the very idea what's informed consent here, because this kind of knowledge or data is shared as well. So for example, for these sexual orientation studies, it's not only UK Biobank, it's also collaboration between with 23andMe. And on the one hand, it opens up many other questions, especially of also of re-identifiability, because this are the kind of websites you're sharing this information, which could be then linked with other kinds of data, and then re-identifiability becomes more possible. And it always have, positives and negatives, or always two or more sides. So we had also this case with the Golden State Killer. I don't know if you came across this. It was a serial killer which had been identified with by DNA samples that have been linked or looked for at the GEDmatch database. So also kind of a database where you can upload your genetic information in order to find relatives, or also one of these websites. And it's the same, it's a similar question. And I mean, this guy itself has not donated information to this website, but he could be re-identified because his because relatives did. And we had a similar case in Sweden this year, where also crime was, or it turns out who was the, I guess also a murder case, also with matching this kind of information with this kind of websites. So of course, we could agree it's okay if it comes to crime, that's one thing, but it also opens up everything about what you don't want to share. So even if you as you had mentioned, I mean, social media, I think we all know the case about Facebook and how data is used there, but this was not the initial idea or the initial business model. So it kind of developed, and the mode in which all these kind of technology are working is collecting data, kind of big style. So it's big data, and then to see what turns out. So everything you're kind of sharing is then could also be then open to be linked to other kind of data. And this is exactly what I mentioned in the case with the cover from the genome hacker. So they used simply this kind of information which is shared on this kind of platforms to re-identify people. So
so the future holds many challenges.
Yeah, I know this is a little bit this topic, but just to be clear, of course, we need to be really careful by ourselves what we share, but it of course needs also regulation, how data could be used and shared across countries and for what kind of purpose. At the same time, the challenge is, of course, it should also not limit medical or biomedical research, because then data is also used in huge amounts to enable research and to have all these breakthroughs and so on and so forth. So it's really the challenge for the future to always to balance it. And where is the line in sharing something on social media? And I think, as you brought it up, this I think is also an illustrative case, even it's not directly connected to Biobank, about what kind of information do you have at the time you are consented. So at the time you open your Facebook account, it has a different kind of knowledge or information about what's the aim of the platform. And now we learned that it's really used really differently. So you're not the user of it. So actually the product or something where data is retrieved from. So also, again, I'm afraid an open issue, but one we need to really closely think about to what also I think it also goes back that it's kind of a broader discussion what consent and informational risks and big data research and big data means currently, and how to manage it and control it, and what kind of safeguards are needed.
Okay, thank you. Very interesting and useful. And I hope you will send us your presentation so we can go back to it and see the resources.
Sure.
Okay, thank you.